Today, let's take a closer look at the market research and segmentation useful in market entry, market positioning, and successful international expansion. So there are 8 steps to collecting data, the first being identifying the kind of information that you wish to gather. Ask yourself questions. What information do I need? Why do I need this information? A well-defined problem is truly a half-solved problem. The tendency is not to spend adequate time on problem definitions, but the result is that the defined problem is too vague to solve. You need to be very specific in the information you wish to gather. Where do you want to conduct this analysis or this data gathering? Are you talking about a single country, a language-specific region, or worldwide? What kind of data are available already? Secondary data are those data or those findings that were gathered for another purpose but are available to you. Always check them, but they may not have the information that you need. It is less expensive, of course, than gathering your own data, so it's a good start. And then, of course, you want to assess the value of your research effort. So if you are going to have to gather primary data, what is the cost of it? Is it greater than the benefit, the outcome? If it's a small market, perhaps you'll do A/B testing instead. Consider the research design. So primary data are gathered through original research that are very specific to your unique problem. However, it is more expensive and it takes more time and resources. There are several points you might want to keep in mind as you look at design of your research effort. You'll want to use multiple indicators rather than a single measure. You need to look at it from several perspectives just to be safe. You want to conduct comparative assessments in multiple markets, and you want to look at purchasing patterns and other behaviors. Those weigh heavily because they are a true indicator of what is happening in that market. When you consider the research methodologies available to you, there is, of course, survey research, like quantitative research. You can also do qualitative research, such as focus groups or in-depth interviews. It's also appropriate to just view what's going on. It's called observation. You can use a video camera, or you can just go out into the stores and see how people make decisions. Go to the restaurants and understand how they operate. Go to meetings and see how people communicate with or respect each other. But ultimately, you want to be very careful with what you gather and make sure it's relevant to your research objective. And then, of course, you'll need to analyze the data and present it. And it's always recommended that you present it in real-time terms, clear terms, non-researchy sounding terms, so that managers can make decisions because they clearly understand what the research has revealed. Next up, segmentation, targeting, and positioning based on the research that you've gathered. And often this involves gathering even additional research. So there are several types of segmentation methods. What is segmentation anyhow? So global market segmentation has been defined as the process of identifying specific segments. They may be country or individual consumer groups. But they're segments that have homogeneous attributes, and they're likely to exhibit similar responses to a particular marketing mix. And the process of global market segmentation always begins with the choice of one or more variables to use as a way to group your customers or target market. So often we see that those common variables will be demographic in nature. They may be psychographic. That's the values and attitudes and lifestyles aspect. They may be behavioral, and they may be all about the benefits that are being sought by the target market. So when we look at demographic segmentation, not only do we have demographics, things that you really can't change, what you do, your education, your age, your gender, But we also look at income, which is a critical variable. Now, this is a way of looking at demographic segmentation on a global basis. So, understanding that there are 600 million Southeast Asian consumers, with two-thirds of them under the age of 40, sort of shifts the decision making for many. These kinds of statistics can provide valuable insights to marketers who are looking at the globe and scanning it regularly for opportunities. For example, Disney wants to capitalize on the huge number of young people and their parents' rising incomes in India. That is a way it might extend its brand. Income and population segmentation. Now, this is a different way of segmenting. So, for example, two-thirds of the world's gross national income is found in the Triad, and the Triad is North America, Europe, and the Pacific Rim. So two-thirds of the GNI is in these three areas, but only 12% of the world's population is located in these three areas. So it's something to consider. When you look at the population, for example, you might find that in Sweden, GNI is $54,500, which is really high. But there are fewer than 10 million people all told in Sweden. So that means it's a limited market. You would be doing a lot of work for a very small market were you to enter Sweden with some selected products. Psychographics are related to how people feel, what they believe, and their lifestyle preferences. It's very different than demographics like income or age. So vowels and vowels too have been used for years based on lifestyle surveys to provide psychographics. They categorize in a few dozen groups based on these behaviors and attitudes and values. So, for example, Porsche turned to psychographics after experiencing a worldwide sales decline. They did a psychographic study using the vowels categories, and it showed that Porsche buyers could be divided into several distinct categories, as you can see on the slide. What's important to understand is that you market and message differently to these various categories. Fantasists at 9% who use Porsche as an escape, a form of escape, might not be your low-hanging fruit of your target market. However, Top Guns, those guys and those ladies and gentlemen who want to have control and kind of own the road and the car, that's a large category, a large group, and it's a great way to market. You can market to Top Guns with a different message strategy or market entry strategy than you would, for example, proud patrons for whom Porsche is a reward. Oh, and keep in mind that people of the same age don't necessarily have the same attitude, so you have to be careful about relying only on demographics. Now, behavior segmentation is on how people buy or use a product, how often they use it, how frequently they consume it, how much they consume. Keep in mind the 80-20 rule, which is that 80% of a company's revenues or profits are the result of sales to 20% of customers. So it's a small group that stands for a large percentage of their success. What about market potential? How do you address market potential while avoiding the pitfalls? So if you segment the market in some of the ways that were just discussed, you next have to determine the attractiveness of the identified segments, and then you look at the pitfalls. So it's very easy to see the positive attractiveness of individual country markets based on demographic data and not having enough psychographic data, for example. There's also an inclination to target a country because shareholders and competitors exert pressure on management to not miss out on a potential opportunity. And finally, the danger is that management's network of contacts will emerge as a primary criterion for targeting. That means market entry occurs based on convenience rather than on rigorous market analysis. Something else to consider is feasibility and compatibility. So if the market is large enough, what are the risks? Will you have to adapt in some way? And what is the cost? And will that be covered by sales volume that results? If you don't have too many strong competitors and the market segment is large enough, what is the feasibility targeting a particular segment will generate? So how will you distribute? Is it difficult to distribute in that particular region of the world? What are the regulatory factors that may get in the way? So consider that in India, it takes 3 to 5 years to build an efficient distribution system for many consumer products. Can your product afford that? What about import restrictions and tariffs or a strong home country currency? If they exist, they can drive the price up to the point where it cannot be sold. What about sourcing locally? Is that critical for success for your product? Sometimes it's critical to source at home as opposed to elsewhere in the region. Other times you are more fortunate to source outside the country you're going to market your product in. And finally, you'll want to address the question of whether targeting a particular segment is compatible with the company's overall goals, brand equity and image, or established sources of competitive advantage. It has to make sense. It has to be credible. So, as you're looking to create a product market profile, ask yourself these 9 questions. Who buys our product? Who does not buy it and probably will not buy it? What need does it fulfill or function does it serve? What is its role? In different countries, for example, refrigeration and tablets, like PC tablets, have different functions. Is there a market need that isn't being met by the current product or brand offerings in that country that you would be able to fill? Ask yourself, what problem does your product solve? What are the substitutes? What are they using to satisfy that need that your product might solve? It might be cheaper and just as good, and they would not choose your product because they've found an amenable substitute. How much are they paying? How often and when is the product purchased? And how are they acquiring it? Where are they purchasing it? When you look at positioning, and positioning is a process of developing strategies for staking out your turf or filling a slot in the mind of a target customer. Positioning is frequently used in conjunction with segmentation variables and targeting strategies. So here you have, for example, positioning as an attribute or a benefit. It might be more economic, more reliable, more durable, but it's the attribute that allows you to position it rather than the quality and price. So the attribute for a BMW, well-known German vehicle, is that it's the ultimate driving machine. In Visa, it's everywhere you want to be. And that speaks to what they can do. In terms of quality and price, you can go from premier luxury to good value. Stella Artois is making a name for being reassuringly expensive. So it is the best, essentially. There are also positioning strategies for the global marketer. You have global consumer culture positioning, or what we call GCCP, which is defined as a strategy that identifies a brand as a symbol of a particular global culture or segment. and it can be used to target various segments associated with the emerging global consumer culture. Now, this strategy has proved to be successful for communicating with global teens, for example, or cosmopolitan elites who have homes in multiple countries. Laptop warriors who are globetrotters and consider themselves part of the transnational commerce culture is another type of group. So a brand's GCCP can be reinforced by the careful selection of thematic, verbal, and visual components that are incorporated into advertising and communications. So for high touch GCCP, maybe leisure and romance and materialism are three themes that cross borders effectively. But professionalism and experience are advertising themes that work well for high-tech products such as global financial services. So one of the ways to reinforce GCCP is to use brand symbols whose interpretation defies association with a specific country culture. For example, Nike has the swoosh, and the Mercedes-Benz has a three-pointed star. A second option is foreign consumer cultural positioning, which associates the brand's users, use occasions, or product origins with a particular foreign country or culture. So, and a great example is, of course, Foster Brewing Group, which advertises in the United States its national origin. With humor, I might add. Foster's is Australian for beer. Levi jeans are highly American. Harley-Davidson motorcycles, highly American, and they're easy to market to cosmopolitans around the world. Finally, you have local consumer culture positioning, which is a strategy that associates the brand with local cultural meanings, reflects the local culture's norms, portrays the brand as consumed by local people in the national culture, or depicts the product as locally produced for local consumers, such as Budweiser. Here in America, it's associated with small town America, and people buy it because it's buying American. So these are just a few of the many segmentation opportunities you have as you consider market entry or expansion on an international basis.